Shocking showcases. Road to the new generation.
Greetings, Street Fighter fans! It's been a bit of time since the last video. As we await the fabled 5th character of Street Fighter 5 Season 5, I figured now would be a good time to look over some of the Street Fighter 3 characters. We're gonna focus on the playable and non-playable characters this time around, folks. This video was inspired by a comment left by user Takeo Masaki on G&Q Fool's Gold. Many thanks, Takeo! In addition to covering Street Fighter 3 content, there's more G content to look over. Surprisingly, after the last video, even more about that guy dropped. With A Shadow Falls closing off the series-long Shadowloo arc, Bison seemingly killed only to apparently be reduced to a phantom haunting Ed, Falk, and Seth, and Gill utilizing G's runaway success to unveil himself to the world, it looks like we're finally heading towards Street Fighter 3. So, what's on the horizon? Street Fighter 6! As information leaked in 2020, Street Fighter 6 had been in progress and recently restarted development with the departure of Yoshinori Ono. I won't get into the rumors and speculation, but at the very least, Street Fighter 6 was intended to have a much earlier release, and the current 5th season was not initially planned. With that being said, if we indeed avoid another prequel, then the focus from a storyline standpoint should be tied to the Street Fighter 3 side of the franchise. With Street Fighter 6, what I'd prefer is that we have a slight effort to summarize the events of Second Impact and Third Strike, and continue the Illuminati arc ASAP. While we have seen some of the Street Fighter 3 cast appear in Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5, there's still some who have yet to make their appearances, and some who have yet to settle into their Street Fighter 3 era roles, especially Alex. His story is just beginning. Now, let's have a look at some of our heroes of the new generation. First up, let's have a look at the big boss, Gill. Until he arrived, Bison was the main villain of the series, while Akuma is a rival to Ryu and actually doesn't interact with the majority of the cast. Gill, his brother Urien, and Ko-Lin are representatives of the Secret Society. Unofficially, the Street Fighter fandom calls them the Illuminati. The society dates back over 2,000 years and has been shaping society ever since. Their technology is more advanced than even Shadowloo's. The elites, such as Gill and Urien, are a product of eugenics experiments, generations of selective breeding, and intense training. The now defunct Street Fighter Second Impact official site held a few profiles on the cast. Thanks to the Megashock forum user Lord Vega and the Wayback Machine, we now have the information on Urien. Quote, one of those educated with Gill as a candidate for president of the organization. The parents of the candidates are all clear-minded, physically healthy, and excellent people. Urien's parents both have PhDs, and his mother, in particular, is active in the field of sports mechanics and is an Olympic athlete herself. However, the children selected as good candidates are separated from their parents at the age of 6, and the organization slams them into royal studies. Therefore, the people they can feel most familiar with are several candidates for president who have studied imperial studies together." End quote. Interestingly, the usage of quote-unquote Urien's parent and the last sentence could imply that Urien and Gill are not brothers by blood, though this doesn't seem to be followed up anywhere else. Still, an interesting tidbit to focus on. According to the entries in the Japanese exclusive series of books all about Capcom, which have been kindly translated by the amazing folks at the Lore Threads in the Shoryuken.com and Megashock forums, there's some interesting things going on. In the Street Fighter 3 series of these books, they reveal, according to the Society's grand prophecy, the year 2200 is when they'll build their ideal society. This date is very important. Gill and Urien have been fast-tracking progress since they became elites. In Urien's Street Fighter 5 story mode, it's noted that several mysterious murders had taken place, and Urien also persuaded the council to reluctantly agree to his contributions to the G Project. The big ending stinger to A Shadow Falls has Gill and Colin reflecting on the inaccuracies of the prophecy. Ryu killed Bison and not Charlie, as they intended. But also, after a few of the Black Moons from Shadowloo's Operation Chains caused damage and chaos, Rashid and the heroes prevented all of them from falling. Why are these little details important? Gill, Colin, and sympathetic parties feel Gill is the Messiah. But according to the prophecy seen in Gill's second Impact ending, after the fall of the moons is when a boy who controls the elements is meant to emerge.
When the sun sets on the Solitan Mountain, the Black Moon will break into 7 pieces and fall on the people of Altania. Nothing can prevent this. Death and destruction will violate the land. Misery and suffering will assault the people. Then, after 130 days of nothingness, a boy who controls the elements will come to save the people. From the Book of Maraha, 3, verse 11.
I unfortunately don't have the Dreamcast version of Second Impact, but Gill's ending was exclusive to this edition of the game and did not appear in the arcade release. As I said before, the brothers are fast-tracking their plans. It's because they, or at least Gill, is on borrowed time. In the Street Fighter 3 editions of All About Capcom, they note that every 24 years, a leader is chosen, the president. Starting the brothers' training at age 6, Gill became the leader at age 22. Gill's motives are suspicious. Gill often speaks of harmony, but in Street Fighter 5, he's seen to be asking different people what it is they hope for. Colin, due to the horrors of war and the loss that she experienced, wishes for a utopia. But if you carefully look at her exchange with Gill in his story mode, Gill doesn't exactly seem to share her view. Quote, Indeed, Colin, you were able to see that. Quote, "The ignorant will see it the way that the ignorant wish to see, and the wise will see it the way the wise wish to see." End quote. Two telling statements, aren't they? Gill isn't as noble as he seems. He kidnapped Necro, presumably Effie, as well as countless others, and subjected them to horrifying experiments to meet his goals. On the topic of Gill's inquiries into what his opponents see, Gill appears to use something called his Gate of Harmony. Could that be tied to his seraphic wing? I've noticed something about the technique. It looks absolutely devastating in Street Fighter 5. The ground breaks apart, and it appears the victim is being destroyed by an enraged divine figure. But then, no matter what, whether standing, being counterattacked, or jumping, if it connects, the opponent always simply slumps over. Look how devastating it is to get hit by Urien's dominant crush CA. The torrent of energy sends the opponent helplessly flying. But Gill? No, the opponent seems physically unharmed, but mentally overwhelmed. We don't actually know what's happening with this move. Could it be a form of a psychic attack to make an opponent pliable or docile? If blocked or avoided during startup, it can be seen that Gill does unleash some sort of energy sphere to connect with the opponent. Also, looking closely, right before light engulfs the screen, Gill's forehead gem is glowing brighter and more intensely than ever before seen. On this subject, if we look at Urien, this adds to Gill's habit of inquiring into his opponent's desires. In his arcade mode ending for Street Fighter 5, Urien and Dr. Wu pass an old picture of the brothers as children. They look happy together. And in Gill's story mode, after defeating Urien and him showing his anger, there's a point where Urien desperately wants Gill to just look at him and acknowledge him. Urien was a top candidate for being the president of the Secret Society, but according to entries in All About Capcom, his emotional instability is what made the council drop him and choose Gill, thus rendering him vice president. In Second Impact, he beats Gill, becomes president, only to be humiliated in finding out that only the topmost members know of the Emperor, who is also Gill, thus rendering his hard-earned victory meaningless. Gill is still superior in the eyes of the society. Living in Gill's shadow is the source of their Cain and Abel rivalry. Since Third Strike was the latest game in the series' timeline, but has not yet been followed up on, we don't know what happens to the brothers. Urien's ending shows him seemingly killing Gill and destroying ancient stored brains, and vowing that now that he's free, the age of Urien shall begin. It could be interesting to see Street Fighter 6 follow this plot point and see Urien become even more deranged and powerful. Before we move on the subject of Gill's notable interactions, his fight with G is interesting and brings forth a wave of speculation. Let's take a look. G, the supposed boss of Street Fighter 5 Arcade Edition, according to the developers. Gill, whose existence, as well as the existence of the Secret Society, had been a closely guarded secret to the vast majority of the world, chose to fully unveil himself to the world by using G's Let's Fight stream. This isn't a silly throwaway. It's part of the driving force of Gill's story entry. G has gone from a joke to someone useful for Gill's plans. When they first meet, oddly, G refers to Gill as, quote, the ancient earthling, finally revealing himself as if he had been expecting him. Yet, looking at the information in supplementary materials, and depending on when this fight takes place, Gill shouldn't be older than his 30s. Gill even remarks that G's mysterious power, quote-unquote, was not prophesized, and thus takes to investigating during their fight. After the fight, Gill yet again asks a fighter what they see when they look upon him. As usual, G offers an on-brand but nonsensical statement that even seems to catch Gill's ire. He then notices that he's felt G's power somewhere before, but can't recall where. If this Gate of Harmony or Seraphic Wing is psychic in nature, it may add proof to my previous theory that G is immune to some form of psychic probing. In my last video, G and Q Fool's Gold, I noted that while Rose could draw his card, the Fool, she wasn't sure about some things and thus sent Manat to investigate. But Manat, too, also had trouble getting a read on him. In her story mode, she shows that while she's a student, she is still able to use her psychic abilities and read people. Yet facing G is the only time we've seen her struggle to do so. Going back to my earlier statements, G has been referenced as being a boss in a few places. And he even appears similar to Q as a special fight during arcade mode, if certain conditions are met. In a blog post, he is listed under a section that features the developers describing, quote, legacy boss characters, end quote. He is also described as having, quote, cosmic-like power that we have so little knowledge of, end quote. In the How to Make Capcom Fighting Characters book, Nakayama states, quote, G is the final boss of the game. I think M. Bison looked like he was the final boss until G showed up. But as a numbered installment in the series, we really wanted Street Fighter 5 to have an original boss character, end quote. Quote, there's a lot of backlore to G. Those who have played Street Fighter 3 probably have suspicions about his connection to Gill's G project files and the character Q, and I hope people will keep wondering about the significance of those initials, end quote. So yes, G seems to be a big deal. I am greatly anticipating Rose's story mode contributions due to their hinted connection, so I eagerly await what we will learn. A few weeks ago, Capcom unveiled something rather interesting. The Capcom Pro Tour kicked off with some new material. Character colors, an alt costume for G and Seth, but also, interestingly, a drastically new stage for G himself. This stage isn't just another arena. No. It seems to blatantly set up G as a big villain. In my last two videos, I've basically theorized that G is some sort of mastermind, akin to an evil syndicate leader in a tokusatsu show, and that the Q we see from Third Strike may be a minion or a rebellious victim of G. I also stated that I feel all of G's willing or unwilling underlings all have a similar look to his story costume, especially since the developer showed the image of a male and a female in a replica of G's story outfit. Well, with the new stage, we have a floating space station and a camera crew who are wearing G's alternate costume mask. Does this mean that G is an alien? So far, I personally would say absolutely not. In the store description, Dan states that G got so successful with the earnings from his Let's Fight streams, he was able to buy the station. Now, while this is a bit out there, it's not so outlandish. After all, Karen Kanzuki has her own deadly space satellites, the Red Spider Lilies. She uses one in her ending in Alpha 3 and references it by name in A Shadow Falls. Welcome to the Ring of Galaxies stage! It features a large number of NPCs in the audience, including a few astronauts floating around. It's staffed by a few men, who I previously noted have G's story-styled mask. The men are well dressed in slacks, crisp white shirts, vests, ties, and each have an armband that says staff. They follow the characters around the arena, gathering footage. The stage is enormous and features two gigantic statues of G, placed at an angle to create the optical illusion of him holding the earth. A Twitter user, Tanuki, presented me with these aerial shots. It's a really beautiful, boss-worthy stage, wouldn't you say? My hat's off to the development team. They really put in a ton of detail with this stage. As we can see, this stage is all G. We see his name and iconography plastered here and there, but here, directly above the fighting space, we see the sun, the clouds, but also we see animals, bugs, and even aquatic life represented. G's really taking this having dominion over all of Earth and over every creeping thing that creeps thing seriously. Well, that's it for now. I guess we can move on to... Take a closer look, citizen of Earth. You missed something. Whoa, wait. How did you... Oh, wow, there's more. I'm being handed a note. I missed out on this completely, but the previously mentioned Twitter user, Tanuki, has more for me. You'll want to see this. Tanuki sent me something rather surprising about Sakura and her new default look for Street Fighter 5. Since her arrival into 5, I have not noticed this. Tanuki noted that Sakura's default costume description on the CFN site states that she's in her work uniform, but doesn't state where exactly she works. He then pointed out something pretty notable. If you look at Sakura's headset, there's a blatant silver G on it. Moreover, it looks like the G insignia all over G's stage, and the very one he wears in his Capcom Pro Tour 2021 costume as a necklace. Hey, don't both G and Sakura's default costume vaguely look similar? Tanuki's eagle eye noticed that too. Both are well dressed, wearing black and white with a bit of red and a vest. G's got gold all over the place, but surprisingly, Sakura does too. Again, I never have noticed this. Take a good look at that fancy new scarf. Golden chains? I wonder what that's about. Time will tell if there's more to this or not. So, final thoughts on this section before going back to Street Fighter 3. I'm no stranger to wild speculation and making a mountain of the tiniest molehills. But other than just being clad in the Capcom colors, does it seem weird to anyone else that all these new CPT colors have the characters rocking golden eyes? Also, these are called the refueled costumes. I mean, did they get a power boost from G? Unless... Well, the slogan in the trailer does say, "The world is yours for the taking." So, maybe G's starting off slowly? Who knows where things will go? Shoryuken.com and Megashock user Shakunetsu once reminded me of this old arcade promo for Street Fighter EX2 when I mentioned on the forums my theory that G kidnaps and converts people. Wouldn't that be wild if that's how he... Wait a second. Necro and Effie, two new arrivals from Street Fighter 3. Necro was designed in a sense to fill the void of Dalsim and Blanca in Street Fighter 3. He's got far reach, electric powers, and is more on the bizarre side of the cast. According to All About Capcom, Necro used to be called Ilya. and hails from Russia. A young man who, after the fall of the Soviet Union, wanted to leave his large family and village in search of freedom. It's possible he felt out of place or overlooked with his 3 brothers and 1 sister. In tragic irony, he crossed paths with Gill near Moscow, was kidnapped, mutated, and imprisoned. While imprisoned, he met and fell in love with another victim of the G Project, Effie, an energetic and expressive young woman who loves to sing alongside Necro and joins him in their eventual escape. While in the games, it's not shown what was done to her. The Udon comics show Effie can craft some sort of crustacean-like armor to protect herself. Necro is a key example of how Gill is not so benevolent. Necro, Effie, and countless others are imprisoned against their will and constantly experimented on. As Ilya and Effie escape, Gill's hit squads relentlessly pursue them. As of Third Strike, a 12 unit joins the chase and is directly tasked with killing them both, as they're considered important property to the Secret Society. 12 was created and mass-produced thanks to the research gathered from Ilya's mutation. It's not stated when Ilya and Effie began their escape, but interestingly, they have a few appearances in Street Fighter 5. In Rashid's story mode, several tweets can be seen. As I mentioned in the last episode, Freedom Traveler Ilya is Necro. It's hard to say what stage in his life this is, but it would make sense that this happened before his imprisonment. I don't think he'd want to draw attention to himself and Effie, though who knows, because in the Halloween version of the Russian stage, we can clearly see Ilya and Effie hanging out in the background. There's so much we can learn about this duo that I can easily see them reappearing and hopefully truly earning their freedom in Street Fighter 6 or beyond. Let's see these lovebirds fly the coop and truly put Gill's plans behind them. Effie already loves Ilya, and as of his Third Strike ending, his powers allowed him to save Effie, so he's finally begun to accept himself. Nothing can get in their way. Since we just discussed Necro, let's talk about his unpleasant shadow, 12! 12 is a mass-produced bio-soldier that's part of the larger scope of the G Project. They're more of Urien's pet project, though, as these units are based off of his theories of, quote, human body reconstruction, end quote. It and its precursor, 11, are more advanced than Necro. In addition to stretching, they are able to mimic opponents. Though being perfected, 12 can disappear, create simple weapons, and seemingly heal from any wound. As part of the protocol, 12 units have their memories constantly rewritten. In the Third Strike ending, however, it seems that this particular 12 has gained sentience. It should be noted that despite being a mass-produced soldier and one that's constantly facing rewritten memories, 12 seems to display little bits of personality here and there. In the wind pose where 12 flies off, it can be heard having fun and yelling out, "Woohoo!" While 12 always seems to communicate in binary, 12 very distinctly speaks in English to Necro during their rival scene. Dr. Wu created 11 and 12. In Street Fighter 3, his name was mistranslated into Curé, but this was corrected in Street Fighter 5's materials. It's interesting, Wu was kidnapped by the Secret Society, but ended up liking the work they had tasked him with. He primarily works with Urien's theories of human remodeling to craft weapons, despite him being stated to be a pacifist in the Shadaloo CRI profile. With the growing influence of Street Fighter 3 events on the overall lore and the increased references in Street Fighter 5, I think it's a safe bet this duo will return. The main hero of the new generation. Alex is a blunt young man who sets off on a path of revenge when his mentor and father figure, the Jean Reno doppelganger Tom, is brutally beaten to within an inch of his life by Gill. While never wanting to leave New York prior to Tom's incident, he travels across the world, meeting and learning from fighters. When he meets Ryu, his life is changed. He gets an excitement that carries him far away from his home for an extended period, now no longer driven by revenge, but by inspiration. He truly adopts the lifestyle of a warrior, akin to Ryu. Alex's parents are never mentioned. All we know of them is that Alex's father is close friends with Tom. Alex has been living with Tom and his daughter Patricia for a while. It's never stated if Alex's parents are dead or not, but it seems Alex considers Tom and Patricia his family and spends all his time with them. While Alex doesn't do much in Street Fighter 5, there are a few interesting things to take note of. He lacks his twin shoulder scars from his Street Fighter 3 days. Fong had Shadaloo troopers kidnap him and use him as a viable test subject to gather combat data. His effectiveness was so high that he not only trashed the lab, but Fong used knockout gas to prevent him from destroying the lab completely. He later gets a letter and control piece thanking him for the work he did in the lab, presumably from Li Fen. Later, after a small fight with Dhalsim, he gives his piece to him as a sign of good faith. Now, let's talk about Tom. As I joked earlier, he's very much inspired by Jean Reno. Capcom loves his face. He was even in Onimusha 3, and Charlie's design in Street Fighter 2V resembles him as well. Tom was beaten badly by Gill. The reason for their fight is unknown, but from his statements in Alex's second Impact ending, it felt like a fair fight. So, is that the extent of their connection? Maybe not. While setting up this episode, I was surprised to see that Urien, of all people, has a connection to Tom. It's never clearly specified why, but he hates Tom. Alex's mere mention of Tom infuriates Urien. He only gets vaguely alluded to in Street Fighter 5, but the Shadaloo CRI profiles gives us new information. Tom used to be part of the military and was forced into retirement after an incident with someone who, quote, particularly hates the military, end quote. From what we see in Street Fighter 5, Colleen hates soldiers. I wonder if that could be connected somehow. Since Street Fighter 3 never progressed past Third Strike, and Alex had a minimal appearance in Street Fighter 5, we haven't seen more of his journey. What is interesting, though, is whether or not it's canon. Gill's Third Strike ending has him taking people to a far-off land, but before that, he changes Alex. He gains Gill's blue and red skin for reasons never elaborated on. I feel as though Alex's role is going to explore possible connections to the Secret Society. If Alex's parents are dead, could they have been former members who fled, only to be killed in what seemed to be an accident, thus leaving Tom to raise Alex? If Street Fighter 6 continues with the forward trajectory shown in A Shadow Falls, then I hope we get to see Alex in the spotlight once again and learn more about him and Tom. They've got potential, so let's see it. Ryu doesn't need to take point in the Gill plot. This should be Alex's thing. The Invincible Hermit, Oro. While we last saw him as a part of a playable roster in Third Strike, he's made several brief appearances in Street Fighter 5 and will be playable later this year. Oro is a famed hermit who, at over 130 years old, is still so strong he has to fight with one arm behind his back. Or, in the case of Street Fighter 5, he uses one hand to hold his beloved pet turtle. Oro loves a good challenge. Sadly, no one can even match him. So he spends most of his time hanging out with his various pets. Oro utilizes Senjutsu, a mysterious power that allows him to utilize a telekinetic-like mastery over objects within his vicinity. Oro's appearance is notably strange. He's literally a jaundice-like yellow, and his eyes constantly cycle between a Kuma-like red and an eerie blue. This extends past the sprites and makes its way into official art. In his second impact portrait and ending art, he's depicted with white, pupilless eyes. But in Third Strike, his eyes are a solid red. His overall appearance may have changed when he achieved his lofty martial arts status. During the course of Street Fighter 3, he takes interest in Ryu and sees great potential in him. He thinks that if Ryu works hard, he'll be able to fight him at his full potential in 15 years. In Street Fighter 5, he shows a familiarity with certain characters. He and Dhalsim are old friends. Interestingly, in a two-part side reader on the official Street Fighter page entitled Musings on a Still Night, he and the Yoga Master are discussing philosophies on fighting and ki. To prove a point, Oro taps into the Satsui no Hado and then casually dissipates it. He believes all forms of ki come from a singular source, but it's more complicated than labeling the powers good or evil. He makes a note that labeling a power evil when trying to learn and suppress it makes for errors. He's shown to be right in a way, with Ryu in A Shadow Falls. By approaching the Satsui no Hado, but not letting it consume him, and finding balance allowed him to move forward. Rose sends Manat to find Oro and tell him about the upcoming events of A Shadow Falls, and that the outcome of the event needs to be carefully observed. I'm not sure what this could mean for Oro, Manat, and Rose, but I'm all the more eager to see Rose and Oro's story contributions now. The future for Oro is interesting. Whether he directly engages with Ryu and trains him, or, as we saw in his Third Strike ending, hides in the shadows and pushes Ryu towards greatness, remains to be seen. But I feel that the more we see of him, will unearth some interesting connections. Oro's been around for a long time and has met many people. We now know that he's friends with Dhalsim and is aware of Rose and the various powers that run through the series. In his time, he may have seen the rise of Shadowloo and more. He makes mention that he hasn't trained seriously for 50 years. So I'm wondering if at some point we'll be privy to that event. Was it just a throwaway line to show his age? Or did something significant happen that long ago? Oro's not going to be taking a vacation anytime soon. The Sennin is along for the ride. The young Kunoichi, with her head in the clouds and hoping for a fun life of romance, Ibuki. Ibuki's a pretty popular character and rather lighthearted, but she interestingly has some notable lore connections via her mission. Ibuki's clan take on missions and can be hired by clients. In Street Fighter 3, Ibuki is tasked with locating the G-File, a rather important document detailing Gill's plans. In the All About Capcom books, it's described as the G-File is the interim report for the first phase of the World Restructuring Plan. It summarizes the incidents that Gill's organization caused to control the world. When an ordinary person views it, it would basically look like a scrap of a newspaper, because it is just a report on a world incident or event. If you read carefully, you will be amazed at the detailed specifics that no one knows. It is impossible to disclose it, considering that it will cause confusion in the world." End quote. Thanks to Back From On from the Megashock and Shoryuken.com forums for the translation. Disturbingly, Gill freely hands this over upon being beaten by Ibuki, gushing about the document's brilliance and how the plan has already been enacted. Thus, it's impossible to stop. Remember, according to the All About Capcom entry, this is only the first phase of his plan, which has already begun. We don't know what else Gill has planned, but merely having possession of the document seems to be useless. Nakayama, in the section about G, implied that there may be connections between the G Project files, G himself, and Q. Ibuki completed her assignment and was able to eventually enter university, where she was dragged into the ninja club unknowingly, dashing her dreams of a normal life once again. I wonder if Ibuki will be dragged into the future of the Secret Society plot. As of Street Fighter 5, she was temporarily hired to work with Karin, and as a result, she became involved in the fall of Shadaloo. That mission prevented her from being a mere bystander in the wacky world of Street Fighter. She made history. Thus, I feel as she gets older and gains more skill, she may be faced with stark choices that cause her to grow up. What assignments will her clan involve her in? And what effect will they have on her? She wishes to have a normal life and enjoy the finer things. But will she get the chance? Only time will tell. I've already mentioned G, and I just mentioned Nakayama hinting that there may be connections to G via Q and the G Project files. So, let's take a moment to look at Q himself. He's a walking enigma, known as the Trenchcoat Man, officially by the CIA. In my previous video and first Street Fighter video essay, Man of Mystery, I covered a lot of what was known about Q at the time. Now that more has been revealed about the people investigating him, I figured we could take a look at that. First up is Richard Burgman, the public relations officer for the CIA. In supplementary material, there is a statement from him basically stating that the CIA cannot confirm or deny the existence of, quote, the Trenchcoat Man. I personally made a mistake. Initially, I thought that he was the other man in Q's ending, but with new information, that's apparently supposed to be Wayne Nakamura, David and Gillian's boss. Richard has not been seen in-game. Next up is Wayne Nakamura. He's a 30-year veteran known for his attention to detail and for training the next crop of agents. He is the stern but kind boss to David and Gillian. An important detail in the Shadaloo CRI profile states that he was a witness to Q, and for an unspecified time, he and the agency have been investigating him. For years, there appears to be a man in a trench coat in Ken's old Street Fighter 2 stage, but later editions of Street Fighter 2 removed him entirely. That led to the theory, or rumor, that this was Q all along. Even in Q's ending, there's a strange newspaper article of a ship with the words, quote-unquote, Roba Deka Q on it. In Japanese, Deka usually refers to a cop or investigator, like the series Tokuso Sentai Deka Ranger. Now, that old rumor seems to have been canonized by Capcom due to the blatant reference to Wayne observing a mysterious man at an American port. Ken fights in an American port. Next up is David Spender. He and Juliana, or Gillian, work tough cases together. He's the realist, and while he's a top-level agent with great intuition and success, he's able to turn it off and is known for being rather laid back when off the job. Gillian Leigh is part of the duo that work tough cases for the CIA. She has a love of cryptids, and not only does she believe in the supernatural, when she was a kid, she supposedly met with a, quote, a strange living being, pure white, who could change its appearance, end quote. As a result, she's put in charge of occult or strange cases, which she's incredibly passionate about. You'll probably notice that I refer to the female investigator as Gillian and not Juliana, as it's written elsewhere. There's an interesting note that Midgaro Sorm, one of the go-to lore investigators and translators of Shoryuken.com and Megashock's lore thread, pointed out. Gillian is a mistranslation akin to Dr. Kure from Third Strike. Quote, the original name is written Jurian, not Juriana, and Gillian Anderson's first name is consistently transcribed as Jirian in Japanese, except they often miswrite it as Jurian indeed. Jurian would be better suited as a rendition of Julianne, but it's apparent they actually wanted to use Gillian Anderson's name, end quote. Also, quote, that's the definitive proof they wanted to use Gillian Leigh Anderson's actual name, as Leigh is pronounced exactly as Lee. The Japanese transcribe it as Ri accordingly. But one wouldn't see the difference between a Ri, meaning Lee, and one meaning Lee if he doesn't know beforehand. So folks, Juliana is wrong and always has been from the start, end quote. If it wasn't apparent, the duo is based on the leads of the X-Files. If you look closely, Midgaro Sorm pieced together several details taken from the characters of Mulder and Scully, as well as their real-life performers. Let's jump in. David Spender, as Midgaro Sorm points out, is in reference to David Duchovny, and Spender is from Mulder's birth father, the cigarette-smoking man. David and Gillian are flipped. In Street Fighter, David's not searching the skies for the truth. He's the realist, while Gillian's the one who wants to hang out with some cryptids. Midgaro Sorm theorizes that Gillian's love of anime could be a reference to Gillian Anderson dubbing a Ghibli movie. Specifically, she was the character of Moro in Princess Mononoke. With the Shadaloo CRI breathing in new life to these investigators, it is my hope that we'll see them again alongside Q. Who knows, they may even run into Viper. She's certainly had several key appearances in Street Fighter 5, so there's a chance she'll be back in Street Fighter 6, chasing a man in a trench coat. As a parting thought on Q, while recent revelations have not provided new information directly about him, I think the theory that I and others have shared about there being multiple agents of G, or Qs, looks more likely every day. I don't think G is the Q we play in Third Strike. Heck, I'm wondering if even through Third Strike there are multiple Qs. As I pointed out in my video, Man of Mystery, there's some weird inconsistency with Q's skin tone. The very few frames that show his skin appear to be tanned rather than shadowed. Here are the hex values for the colors of his skin. Hopefully, the near future of Street Fighter has more for us to investigate. A final bonus before we move on. In past videos and the comment section for both, I've pointed out that the Japanese version of Third Strike had tons of exclusive, character-specific win quotes that didn't make it into Western releases. One of which is when Gill defeats Q. Nothing spectacular is revealed, but it does illustrate that not even Gill knows who or what Q is, thus showing that as far as we know, he's not a product of the Secret Society. Quote, even I, in all my omnipotence, can't understand. Who are you? End quote. As always, many thanks to Midgaro Sorm for the translation. Okay, that's enough on cue. Let's move on for real this time. Yun and Yang, the twin kung fu prodigies. Interestingly, they have some connections to a few Street Fighters. Leigh of Street Fighter 1 is their uncle. They currently work in his hotel, the Rising Dragon. But in Street Fighter 4, they worked alongside Chun-Li in a shop before she left to deal with SIA. Interestingly, unlike his second Impact ending, Yun's third strike ending actually heavily features Gill, and he reveals more of his cryptic plot. He states that he wants to return the world to a balance. He's so impressed with Yun that he shares his plot and leaves the brothers the town he was occupying to do with as they wish. Yang's ending is more of what the two shared in the previous entries. Overall, Yun's ending being so tied to Gill makes a bit more sense when you look at his All About Capcom entry. It states that some plot was underway by the secret society that targeted their city and was somehow, quote-unquote, warping it. Yang's ending shows that the brothers were away for several weeks investigating, and the sisters Ho Mei and Xiao Mei were worried. Speaking of the sisters, they both like the Leigh brothers, leading to a bit of a love conflict. Okay, let's break it down. Yang likes Ho Mei, but doesn't act on those feelings because, despite always chewing him out, she really does like Yun, as confirmed by her sister Xiao Mei during their absence in Third Strike. Xiao Mei likes Yang, and while he initially liked her sister, in his Third Strike ending, he ends up cozying up to Xiao Mei. Lastly, Yun is completely oblivious to everything. With that deeper connection to Gill, ties to Leigh and Chun-Li, it's possible that they could be brought back into a larger plot into the future. The Anatsuken rep of the new generation, Sean Matsuda. Sean comes from a line of jiu-jitsu martial artists and was trained in the family style, like Laura. However, after witnessing Ken in a tournament, he shifted his focus entirely and began to imitate his style of Anatsuken. While he's rough around the edges, he shows promise. Ken shirking training duties convinced him to fight Ryu to hilarious effect. But his spirit was not diminished. A year later in Third Strike, he entered the US Martial Arts Tournament. Despite losing the qualifying match, it's noted that he is improving. Who knows where we'll next see Sean? The guy's got guts and ambition. The third boxer in the series, and the most classy. Hailing from England is the elegant and talented gentleman boxer, Dudley. His father, a wealthy, esteemed businessman who employed pro athletes, suddenly began a streak of business failures until he lost all of his possessions while Dudley was in college. Dudley began to climb back up the social ladder until he became a successful heavyweight boxer. Despite regaining wealth and status, he still was unable to locate his father's prized Jaguar. It's implied that at some point his father passed away. I suspect that Dudley's search for his father's car is a last connection, and thus being more than snatching up a simple status symbol. After impressing Gill, he's given the keys to the Jag and drives off into the horizon. A year later in Third Strike, he has since gained the title of Sir. He can frequently be seen with his butler, Mr. Ortho K. Gotch. As established in the Shadaloo CRI files, he is a legend in the world of butlers, and is friends with Rashid's butler, Azam, and Karin's butler, Shibasaki. Dudley doesn't have the strongest connection to the overall plot, but that could be changed at some point. Either way, he is a rather well-liked character, and his return in Street Fighter 4 was favorable, so it's not very likely that he'll be forgotten anytime soon. The Metro City odd couple, Hugo and Poison, step out of the background and appear at the forefront in the Street Fighter 3 series. Leaving behind the world of crime, Hugo of the Andore wrestling family and Poison Kiss decide to pursue their mutual love of wrestling. While nothing major happens in their plot, it is interesting that Second Impact gives Hugo a choice of final bosses: Elena, Gill, Necro, or Ryu. In his ending with Elena as his partner, they team up and prepare to fight a tag team match. What's interesting is that their opponents are legendary Slam Masters Mike Hagar and Black Widow. After leaving the world of politics, Hagar has returned to the world of wrestling, and Black Widow is still an active wrestler. Black Widow's inclusion is interesting. While I find her rather cool, I was surprised to see her pop up again in the Shadaloo CRI archives with some new lore. In the profile for Yoko Harmageddon, Rainbow Mika's trainer, it's revealed that she had a fateful match with Black Widow, and it gave her career-ending injuries for her neck and her back. Though, for some strange reason, this information is omitted from the English version of Rainbow Mika's profile. SRK and Megashock user Back From On was the one who translated her profile into English and noted that one of Widow's key moves, the Vortex Fall, may be the culprit behind Yoko's injuries. Upon the release of her English profile, many of us were surprised at the omission of Black Widow. I hope that one day, Widow makes it to a Street Fighter game. She's got a cool look and aesthetic and could be a nice rival for Mika, since she ended the career of her beloved personal trainer. Though, who knows? During a random Google image search, I saw an image that caught my eye. A user at the forum Resetera, named Rice, pointed out that in Street Fighter 5, Seth has some moves that seem inspired by Black Widow, as seen here. Rice also noted, quote, "As for the thematic link between the two, in-game, Black Widow's design is androgynous with a deep voice, and advertisements purposefully use neutral Japanese pronouns to leave it up in the air whether or not the character was male or female. And, quote, Black Widow also has a spider motif like Jury, who clearly inspired this new incarnation of Seth," end quote. With Hugo and Poison making their return in Ultra Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter Cross Tekken, they've stuck around in one way or another. If anything, Street Fighter 5 has several Metro City reps, with Cody finally changing the direction of his life and Lucia making her Street Fighter debut. I feel it's a safe bet that in one way or another, they'll all make their presence known in Street Fighter 6 and beyond. Remy, the man of contradiction, the fighter who hates all fighters. Not much is known about the young Frenchman who, despite his hatred of fighters, is adept at savate. Remy and his sister were abandoned by their father. At some point, his sister died, and he preserved her body in ice and kept her in the Biscay Bay. Alex is the only character that has a notable interaction with Remy, and, it doesn't go well. In Remy's ending, he gains closure and accepts that, by keeping his grudge and his sister's corpse, he cannot move on with his life. He bids her goodbye and allows her body to sink. Before he leaves, he sees some brilliant light in the cavern that served as his sister's tomb and goes to investigate, feeling compelled to take on a new direction. Since there is so little on him, it's impossible for me to even guess what this light could be. he doesn't do much except yell at Alex. Now, the elephant in the room is who is Remy's father, and why do his moves resemble Guile and Charlie's? No real hints are given about his dad. And as for the martial arts, Remy, like Necro, was made to fill the void of a missing Street Fighter 2 character. It should be noted that, according to his move names, Remy's abilities don't use sound, but rather light. Such moves include Light of Justice and Light of Virtue. Remy has an interesting design journey. According to Nakayama, at one point, Remy was going to be a character that possibly suffered from multiple personality disorder and used poison hands to fight. If you look closely at the first design, he wears what clearly looks to be a Shadaloo symbol on his jumpsuit. It seems that his design may have been repurposed into Ed somewhat, young Shadaloo agent, and the poison hands technique seems to have been recycled into Fong. Whether or not we'll see Remy again is up in the air. While he's seemingly not an in-demand pick for a return, with him having so little about him, there's a lot of potential that can be utilized if Capcom ever wants to. If his original concept was indeed tied to Shadaloo, there's some wild places they could take things in. Overall, Remy's practically a blank slate. Let's see what the future holds for him. The stern karate girl who wants to make her late father proud, Makoto. This pint-sized powerhouse is trained in Rindokan. Her father was a master of the intense karate style, but tragically passed away. Her older brother, unfortunately, has no talent for fighting, but rather business. So ultimately, the family dojo became forgotten and broken down. Her appearances in Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter 4 are focused on the fading glory of the dojo, but show Makoto is a rising star. In Street Fighter 4, despite her young age, her fearlessness and drive gains her respect from more seasoned fighters. While not interacting much in-game, other media like the Udon Street Fighter comic series like to have her, Ibuki, and Elena interact. Her storyline doesn't prevent her from being bundled in future stories, thus I feel she could easily make a return in the future. With her third strike ending, her exploits raised the reputation of the dojo and brought in new recruits across the land. Who knows? She may have a rivalry with Dan in the future over gathering students across Japan. Elena, one of the most cheerful, optimistic, and friendly characters in the entire series. Armed with incredibly fluid, rotoscoped sprites and utilizing capoeira, she certainly made a splash when she was introduced. The daughter of a Kenyan chieftain, she inherited her father's fighting style and love for traveling and learning. Whereas he earned his PhD in France, she eventually traveled to Japan and met her beloved best friend, Naru-chan. In her third strike ending, as the new year approaches, she leaves Japan and heads to France. She gets nostalgic as she writes to Naru-chan, but is excited to see what new friends she can make in France. In Street Fighter 4, her and a shaman from her village note something is wrong with nature. Some evil presence is coming that will bring death. It's never fully elaborated on, but it seems that it is referring to the SIN tournament, though I wonder if this will be explored later. Who knows? Interestingly, she's one of the people that G encounters in his arcade ending, along with Dan and Hakan. So who knows if a plot point has been newly seeded? Being such a cheerful and sociable fighter will make it easy for her to pop up again in a future title. But her ties to nature and wish to protect it also make it easy to involve her in a plot to protect and preserve the world if Gill's plans lead to a culling or degradation of nature. I'm sure we'll see her again. There you have it. A lot of new faces were made for the Street Fighter 3 series. While some of them have returned in Street Fighter 4 and 5, there's still tons of potential for them to come back and have a bigger impact on the future of the series. Now that Street Fighter 5 has ended the Shadaloo arc for the foreseeable future, and notably, is progressing, I'm all but convinced that Street Fighter 6 and beyond will actually move the story forward, and will hopefully keep forward momentum. It's certainly an interesting time to be a Street Fighter fan. Here's to us! Well, fight fans, that's about it! The future's looking bright. Who knows what's on the horizon?
The future is in peril. Your information is outdated, Wondingo. No one is safe as long as that man continues his plans unopposed.
On April 19th, 2021, Rose was released to Street Fighter 5. As I played her story mode, it hit with a bang. The future of Street Fighter lies in none other than G. I began scripting this entire episode well before her release, but now I cannot overlook this information. Rose's update brings terrifying information. As I previously suspected, G is difficult for Rose to properly read. As she confronts him face to face, his card, the Fool, is no longer relevant. Her win quote to him reveals that now, his card is the world. Before that, we have a scene of Rose and Oro conversing. Oro notes that he's a little older than Rose. Initially, I thought this was a joke, but it's never been stated how old Rose actually is. In All About Capcom, her Street Fighter 0 or Alpha 1 entry states, quote, "Her age is unknown, but she is someone Chun-Li would consider middle-aged." End quote. Could Soul Power Mastery have an effect in slowing down aging? I don't know if there's enough to suggest that, but I did think it was an interesting observation. Going back to my previous episode, G&Q, Fool's Gold, I noted that while Dalsim cannot sense evil in G, that may not clear him and state he is a good man. Oro notes that it's not an evil or imbalanced power, but rather it's one with nature. Rose adds that it is an overwhelming force of nature that she cannot ignore. Speaking of Dalsim, in her win quote against him, Rose states, "You can sense it too, can you not? This immense power and where it leads." Dalsim's quote, on the other hand, says, quote, "All is as the god Agni foretells." End quote. Upon meeting G, she notes that the source is the Fool, but the wheel of fate has already turned. Interestingly, just like with Gill's story mode, G is defeated, but not exactly bothered by that. In fact, this is Christopher Corey Smith at his most intimidating. G, while cryptic, basically outlines that Rose should be very afraid. Rose has a vision that we are not allowed to see, and G confirms that he had the same vision. Basically, he is not a good man, but whoever he is represents the end of all things. He literally is the worst case scenario. Rose confirms that when she confronted Bison and Shadaloo, that was to stave off the end of the world, but she flat out says it's too late with regards to G, and that nothing can stop this. This eerily fits in with the prophecy Gill and his illuminated brethren spout out about. I no longer know what G is. I don't want him to be a god or an alien, but rather a man utilizing a possibly cosmic force. But regardless of what I want, interestingly, he says to Rose, quote, "It's our fate, the same fate as all my Earthlings, and the same fate of the entire universe." End quote. Rose again confirms that G's appearance and gimmick is all a mask. She states that, quote, "Despite appearances, I am not sure who he really is," end quote. Then again confirms that the world is going to end. Rose returns from the battle visibly shaken. Minot takes note of this and draws her a bath. G is worse than Bison and anything Shadaloo ever did. She yet again states how grim this all is. We cannot do anything to stop it, even with Bison finally dying and largely taking psycho power out of the world. It still will not stop whatever horror G represents. Rose plans her course of action rather than giving up. She feels she's the only one who can stop G. She theorizes that if she can send her consciousness to her former self, akin to Catherine Pryde sending her consciousness into Kitty Pryde of the past in X-Men Days of Future Past, then we can have a chance to stop the seed of evil from ever taking root. It's interesting. The name of Rose's story mode is Back to Alpha. At the end, as a bookend, she says, quote, "Yes, I might be able to start it all over again, from zero," end quote. What does this mean? Could Street Fighter 6 deal with Rose going into the past to stop the root of whatever G is? Or is she going back further? I wasn't as quick on the draw as I would have liked, and others have debated whether Street Fighter 6 will be a reboot. I personally don't want it to be, and there is a possibility that this is not the case. I earlier made references to Days of Future Past. That didn't reboot the X-Men, the way that DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths did. For all we know, Rose may utilize psychic time travel to either change things in the past, or, on a smaller scale, it's her finding out new information in the past that will help her and the heroes be able to stop G. Street Fighter, despite its occasional difficulty with accessibility to lore, has come very far, and I think restarting would be a problem. We've finally finished with Bison, and the Illuminati as well as several loose ends are begging to be looked at. Another issue to look at is Alpha or Zero was Bison's tale. Rose has shown that Bison was not ushering the specific end of the world scenario that she feared. Stopping him took decades, but it wasn't enough to put a dent in the coming disaster of G. Going back and retreading Alpha wouldn't make sense, since whatever G represents may have taken root earlier. As of now, there's too little information to say either way. I don't think Capcom's gonna start it over. I think this just may be a particular storyline. As far as I know, battle costumes are not canon, but what if Rose's was? The store description from Dan grabbed my attention. Quote, "This here is Rose as a war-hardened veteran. She looks like a real badass, right? But what's with the messed up scarf? It's all frayed at the end. Doesn't she earn a fortune on fortune-telling? She should get a new one." End quote. Is this just a fun Assassin's Creed-like costume? Or are we going to see Rose alter the past and come into Street Fighter 6 rocking this outfit? Is this her new uniform in the ongoing fight against G and his forces in the present? Is this how she trained in her youth when first learning soul power? I don't know what to make of it. Also, why is her hair brown for once? The future of Street Fighter certainly looks like it's going for a seismic shift. As the devs kept saying, G is a boss and important to the future of the series. Will Street Fighter 6 move past Third Strike finally and introduce a bold new chapter? I hope things keep ramping up the excitement. We still have Oro coming soon, so it's possible that he could continue this story thread. Maybe the reason that the fifth character is shrouded in mystery is that they deal with the combined Rose G plot. Anyways, Within a few months, they supposedly are going to finally reveal info on character number 5. So we'll see then. All the best, everyone, and keep an eye out. Things are about to get wild. Hey guys, I just wanted to say hello to everyone. Thank you for checking out this video. Thank you for sharing it with friends and allies alike. Now, I just want to address the elephant in the room. I had to delay this video several times. I know it's same old story. But yeah, so at the time of recording this particular section, Oro and Akira have been released. They look pretty fun, and I really liked their story contributions. It was pretty cool. So, what do you all think of Luke? I'm still waiting, kind of on the fence, but I'm hoping that he has an interesting role to play in the future to come. Well, we'll see how things go in November, but until then, we'll see. I hope there's more info, on G, or even a peek at Street Fighter 6, something to keep all of us, speculating about the future of the lore. I really don't want Street Fighter to reboot at all. I'm just hoping that Street Fighter 6 continues the storyline of Street Fighter 3 and then launches into something new and bold. Whether that wraps up the Illuminati arc, or it wraps it up and jumps straight into whatever G's been planning, or it's all parallel and a big old mixture of something else. I don't know, but I just hope that we keep on moving forward. I hope that it's something fun. But until then, we'll see. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for always having my back, always commenting, sharing your theories, all of that. So until next time, I'll see you then. All the best.